Hi, everybody. Nice to see you on Zoom. Dave Otte, principal and owner at Holst, also previous XCOM member of the Urban Design Panel and longtime supporter of this group. Good to see it thriving. Jesse, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jessie Newts. I'm an associate here at Holst, and I'm project architect for the Hillsboro shelter.
So Fiona and David asked us after seeing a presentation about the shelter to come and talk to the Urban Design Panel for a number of reasons. One was just about, the Urban Design Panel's interest in homeless services, in the connection between the urban environment and urban design with folks that are struggling on the streets. But also to talk a little bit about a unique aspect of this project, that it's a design build project where Holst is actually working for Walsh Construction, and Walsh Construction carries the contract with the City of Hillsboro in Washington County. I thought I would start out a little bit by framing the conversation around design build, what our experience has been, what are some sort of benefits and some things to look out for, especially since I'm sure we have a lot of designers on this call that might look at these types of delivery methods. And then I'll talk a little bit about our efforts west of the hills in Beaverton and Hillsboro that leads us out to the Hillsboro shelter, where Jesse will go into a deep dive on that project. So to back up a little bit about our experience with design build, Holst doesn't do a lot of design build, but when we do design build, we tend to do it with Walsh Construction. We've got a long history working with Walsh that dates back to about 1996, I believe, was our first project with them at the River Tech building in the Pearl District. Beginning about 15 years ago, some projects that I led really started this design build relationship with Walsh that was focused mainly on rehabilitation and renovations of public housing buildings in and around Portland, mostly for the Housing Authority of Portland, otherwise known as Home Forward. So what you see on the board here is a few of the projects that we've completed or that are under design right now with Walsh, working for Home Forward. Most of these buildings were 1960s, 1970s era public housing projects that had reached the end of their useful life, both from mechanical and electrical perspectives, but also skin, windows, roofing. All these buildings were in pretty poor shape. But they have, hundreds and hundreds of people where this is where they call home. And so these design build efforts were really helpful in keeping folks in their homes while we renovated these buildings through very complicated phased processes. And that's where design build really helped out quite a bit. But so through these projects, we were able to build a really trusting relationship with Walsh, where it was not like a contractor and architect. It was really like one team that came at these projects together, and we spoke the same language. We have similar people on all the projects, so that there's a lot of continuity. And it's just been a really successful experiment. Um, and so when the shelter came out for RFP by the City of Hillsboro, we said, well, why don't we go after a new build project and see how that goes? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I wanted to hit on a few key items that we see as uh, uh, major considerations when doing design build. Um, the first is that, we like to go after projects where we're getting selected based on our qualifications, where it's not strictly just a price-based initiative. Design build can fall apart pretty quickly when everything is just based on price. Obviously, price is a huge factor, and design build helps drive the price down. But I would advise folks to be careful about procurement where the selection is purely just based on price. Qualifications, I think, matter much more to delivering a quality product than who can build it the cheapest. An integrated team, I mentioned that a little bit. We have the same project managers working between Holst and Walsh on these projects, a lot of the same principles, a lot of the same sort of like common elements to make sure that there's continuity, and that provides for efficiency, and that just provides for like good teamwork. Um, Budget is a key driver. We don't want to be the only driver, but a big reason owners like design build is the budget is much easier to get to when you have everybody working hand in hand, and it's not sort of like people on opposite sides of the fence. Um, and one of the big things that's important for design build to be successful is to have a very engaged owner. Having an owner that understands this process, is flexible with our team, and but also makes timely decisions, and is almost a part of that design build effort where we're all integrated as one sort of team. Design build can certainly lead to an expedited schedule. Having the contractor in charge early can really help, I think, hone in on what's important for the schedule. A lot of times when you're doing either design build or CMGC, where a contractor might be involved early, but they don't really have authority or agency in the process. Sometimes their voice isn't as central to driving the schedule forward. And so having them really lead the schedule discussion from the get-go, in my experience, can really help speed things up. And not so much on the design side, it's mainly on the owner side. It's mainly on decision making. It's on keeping the project moving forward from a financing perspective. We can always keep up on our side of things, but having the owner understand the schedule implications from the contractor's perspective, somehow that seems to make things go faster than when the architect says we need to hurry up. And then efficiency and consolidated risk. I think that, the good thing about having a trusted partner when you're doing design build is that we're sharing the risk and sharing the benefits together. And so having that trusted relationship is so key. I strongly recommend, if you're going to go into a design build relationship, knowing who you're going into it with and making sure that there's trust before the relationship begins. I've had some design build efforts in the past that haven't been as successful, and usually the one factor that it comes down to is trust. And so having that trusted relationship can make all the difference in the world. So moving on a little bit to our efforts west of the hills, especially focused in the areas of health and housing, which are both, central to the issue of homelessness that is wreaking havoc across our region over the last decade or two. Um, we have 4 projects in the works right now, including the shelter, that kind of speak to these, and they're different kinds of projects. The first one is a pretty traditional affordable housing project that is in very close to the Round in Beaverton. This is in early design right now. We just got our funding from the state of Oregon to begin schematic design. It's called the Henry Street Apartments. It's about 37 to 38 units of deeply affordable housing. I think most of the units will be 30% area median income or below for rent. I think about a third of the units are going to be what's called permanent supportive housing, which means they come with an extra subsidy, but also comes with the charge to help the folks that are the hardest to house. So permanent supportive housing has the services that wrap around the housing to help people succeed, but it also is focused on typically a coordinated care list that's managed by the jurisdiction of the folks that need the most help. And so it's high acuity folks that are not used to living in their own home, often coming directly from living in the streets or in the woods. And so it can be a big culture shock for them. So this is a smallish building. We're trying to bring a little bit of an urban edge to a relatively suburban street that's just off of the central core of Beaverton. We still have a little bit of surface parking, but not a 1-to-1 ratio, trying to reduce the parking as much as possible, but still provide an accurate, an adequate amount. And so it's kind of like moving into the idea of urbanism as you spread away from the Round in Beaverton. Moving to a very integral piece to the homelessness crisis, which is addiction and addiction treatment and recovery. We have 2 projects that are tied together for Washington County, one in Beaverton, one in Hillsboro, that's called the CAT, the Centers for Addiction Treatment and Triage. The center that's in Beaverton is focused on inpatient residential treatments. It is both a renovation of an existing one-story office building, but also an addition, a two-story addition that has the residential treatment beds in it. This is currently under construction, should be opening up, I think, towards the end of the year. And has a lot of healthcare services on one side, and then across the courtyard is where there are shared rooms for people to have temporary housing. That's another piece that we see a lot as a missing like a gap in the system is transitional housing for folks that are going, coming out of detox, coming out of recovery, but aren't quite ready for permanent housing. Having a place for people to be in the interim. We don't have enough beds in our system to help everybody. So a lot of times folks will leave detox, they'll leave, the first parts of treatment, and they won't have a safe place to go, whether it's back out onto the streets, whether it's into unstable housing, and that can just ramp up the potential for relapse. And so building as much transitional housing as we can for addiction treatment and recovery is really important. And then moving into Hillsboro, the other half of CAT is the Hillsboro Recovery Center. This is much more of an outpatient-based facility. It's a renovation of another one-story office building, significant renovation of it. And this is one where a number of different partners are coming in to provide services and sharing this facility. And so we used a lot of trauma-informed design principles on this project that Jesse will talk about the shelter. And also had to do this very quickly with a pretty limited budget. But the whole goal of the CAT project, the Centers for Addiction, is really trying to create a full spectrum of services in Washington County that can treat people everything from straight off the street all the way to getting into permanent supportive housing. And then the shelter. So the shelter, we were awarded this project now, I think about a year and a half ago, January 2024. It is currently wrapping up construction in the next few months. It's both a congregate sleeping shelter and also a village of pods where people have independent living. And I'm not going to get too much into the design because I want Jesse to really explain the project. But one thing I wanted to speak about is its place in the city or lack thereof. So the site for the shelter is very literally at the city limits of Hillsboro on the very, very western edge. The other side of that field at Dairy Creek, that is the city limits. We're across the street from a Winco and a very large parking lot. And so, I think it was a challenge to try and do something that can feel like home for folks that need services, but can also be a bit of a welcoming gateway into the city as people come from the west. This is where people first come into the city of Hillsboro along the TV Highway. And then also, just the constraints of how do you create this this place in a spot that doesn't really have a there, right? How do we create something that feels like it belongs? And does it feel agrarian? Does it feel urban? Does it feel residential? Does it feel commercial? I think those are all sorts of things that we were grappling with. And then Jesse, remind me, is this the part where I hand to you, or am I still going? No, I'm still going. So here we've got a little bit of an aerial image of how the shelter lays out. We've got a congregate building that holds the corner. That's where most of the services are, and then we've got a series of pods that kind of meander their way to the back portion of the site. We do have surface parking. I tried like heck to get to use the Winco parking lot instead of building our own parking lot, but that didn't fly. So we do have some amount of parking and loading. And then project goals, back to the design piece. We were the second team to come in to work on this project. There was a traditional CMGC process that was going forward that was over budget and over time. And so the city of Hillsboro decided to switch gears and go to a design build method. So that was, the primary driver was get this project on budget and get it done very quickly. The other piece, Holst really wanted to create this gateway moment for Hillsboro and also to create a community where people can feel at home. And then something that Jesse will speak a lot about is this idea of deinstitutionalizing the idea of shelter, bringing in trauma-informed design principles, all the while having to build something that is very durable, can take a lot of abuse, but also can feel like a place that people can call home.
Mhm. Thanks, Dave. And then this is where I'll pick up. I'm going to be talking about the Hillsboro shelter in detail, but I'm going to be talking about it through the lens of the 6 principles of trauma-informed design that Holst designs by. So there's safety, nature, coherency, de-escalation, empowerment, and comfort. I won't talk about each of them individually here, but again, like I said, through the next 6 slides, you'll see kind of the design of the shelter evolve while being addressed through these trauma-informed principles. First up is safety. Safety can be very tangibly viewed as locks and gates and barriers and security cameras, which are all things that we do address for the shelter as the nature of the project. But I wanted to talk about it, safety, from a very zoomed out perspective and how safety, the principle or design of safety, shapes the overall site design of the project. These are all iterations that we went through. You can see that the pods are in orange. The blue is the congregate sleeping. We have parking and we have green space, and how they relate to each other across the site, whether it's like the bottom right-hand corner where we're consolidating everything to one end and really leaning into that goal of saving cost and time by developing less of the site, or like most of those other examples where we're spreading things out and we're taking advantage of the whole site. There were a lot of considerations that went through when finding the relationship between these 4 site elements. Looking specifically into safety, we can look at that first column in the middle where you see the parking and the courtyard is between the pods and the congregate shelter right there. So while it's nice to have equal access for the pods and the congregate's building, it's kind of, there's, from a safety perspective, there's a separation there that makes it hard for staff to monitor both sides, and it's stretching staff thin. And while we liked that equal access on both sides, from a safety perspective, we felt we could push it further. So then if we look at the middle column and the top row, just as another example here, we went through, oh, this is great. We have our pods, we have our congregate building. There's a great sight line. They have immediate access to each other. This is going pretty well. But then there was a thought of, this pushes our parking at way one into the site. And that means that there's going to be sort of this uncontrolled, undocumented access that's, people are going to be walking through the entirety of the site to go from the parking to the congregate building. And maybe that's not great from a safety perspective of, how to manage access and control through it. And then if we look at the top right-hand corner, this is the iteration that we ended up going with. We're able to achieve, through this safety lens, this immediate access for staff to be covering the congregate building and the pods. From parking, there was an access to both the pods and the congregate building. And we felt that this was a really good balance through the lens of safety, as well as we're looking at Holds the Corner for that gateway project there. And then there's also a chunk, bottom quarter of the sites, that we were able to leave pretty much untouched. So it helped with our saved cost and time. I think very obviously this diagram isn't showing a very good integration of how green space is dispersed throughout the project. We did work on that, and I can cover that in the next slide. So the next design principle for trauma-informed design is nature. And this is really about the idea how having access to nature, whether it is physically, visually, or kind of conceptually, it's healing for when you're in a point of stress. Just having access to nature, it's really grounding, it's healing, and it's something we should really strive to provide for all projects, but especially for projects with occupants that have been gone through trauma before. And so for this project, we really focused on the accessibility of nature. You can see the main building and the distribution of pods there, and you see green pretty much throughout the entire project. There's no single courtyard where everybody goes to one spot, where you have to walk down these paths to reach a bit of green. We really strive to have green space throughout the entire project at different scales, at different types. At the north end and the south end, we have dog parks with patio areas. This makes it so whether you're in the dormitory of the congregate sleeping room or in the southernmost pod, you have quick access to an outdoor space. We have an outdoor dining area that's directly adjacent to our indoor dining area. So you quickly have the option to go inside or out. We also have these smaller, more intimate courtyards that are distributed along all of the groupings of pods you can see there. And this goes to that idea of scale and options. So if someone wants to sit in a big group, they can go to a large patio. If someone just kind of wants to sit alone on a bench amongst the trees, there's plenty of these little nooks and pockets where you can kind of have your personal moment with nature, that through trauma research can just be very beneficial. And I think we can talk about the next slide now. Coherency. So this is our next design principle for trauma-informed decision-making. And coherency, I like to think as like a measure of how intuitive your building is to navigate. Think about, so if you have to use the bathroom in your new building and you can't find it, you don't know where it goes, the building's confusing, that's pretty frustrated. Now think if you're an individual that is maybe unwell, is scared, a little frustrated, a little angry, and the building's confusing and you can't find the bathroom, that can be pretty triggering to what may feel like disproportionate emotions and feelings. And that's something that we want to avoid for these trauma patients, these traumatized individuals. And so that's why we feel that coherency and this kind of clear, intuitive design is such an important principle for these building types. For the shelter, I feel it's pretty, we really drove by this, having this central corridor, this central access that is to the building. Everything to the page south, which is to the east, that's our staff area. Everything to page north, which is west, that is where the guests will have access. We have our dining, our hygiene, our dormitory, and our pods beyond. It's a very clear, linear, everything is accessed from this corridor. There are large windows on either ends of the corridor to help with orientation. So you can see it through the ends there. Then we also have our primary reception desk, our desk that is staffed 24/7. It's also important that that is highly accessible. It is a landmark for the project and it's off that central corridor, that central spine there. It acts as a landmark for orientation. If anybody, gets lost or confused, or if the staff sees anybody lost or confused, they're posted right there 24/7 and they can help people navigate. I think one other thing for coherency, it's not really visible in the plan view, is the importance of wayfinding through colors. In our design, each of these four main program elements has its assigned material palette. So the staff area is a certain material scheme or color scheme. Then the dining, the hygiene, and dormitories, those are three other color schemes. So if someone's looking for that bathroom, a staff person can say, go down the corridor, it's the dark blue alcove. And just having that kind of really clear color scheme, bold moves, that's super intuitive. It just really helps folks feel like they understand their space that they're walking in, and it helps them feel comfortable and safe and healing. Okay, next slide. And part of that also is feeling comfortable, safe, and healing is de-escalation. So escalation is bound to happen. And there's sort of two ways to go about it. There is the prevention of even having the escalating starting in the first place. And then there's the recover from de-escalation. So once a situation has been escalated, how can we recover from this? Architecturally, the main way we can address de-escalation, the recovery of it, is having a place for someone to retreat. So if you only have large group rooms and there's no side alcoves, there's no side doors, there's no quiet rooms available, it's going to be really hard to take an individual that is struggling in their environment, struggling in their situation, to kind of calm down when they're in that same environment with those same triggering features. So having a quiet room, having a side door that can take them outside, just that is going to help with the recovery for de-escalation. And then for the prevention of escalating events, I wanted to talk about our congregate sleeping room and how we really thought about this when we were laying out these alcoves. So, because inherently, I mean, we needed to have 36 beds in a single room. It's bound to be, it's going to be stressful. We had to be really mindful of how we were going to space all this out. We're also, I mean, it would have been really easy to make this room super big, but we're on a budget with space and cost. And so we really had to be efficient, find kind of that balance of how can we be the most efficient, but also how can we not make this a traumatizing space for people to sleep in at night. So the study right here, we went through dozens. This is a snippet of them of how are we going to lay out these bed alcoves. You can see we went through zigzags. We went through kind of bunching them together. But the main goal or main thing that we found was that avoiding dead ends. So no one ever felt they were going through and they were feeling trapped. Every route should have, if they are walking one way, they see someone they're not getting along with right now, they can turn around and go the other way. There's always multiple routes to get somewhere. We also had to maintain a clarity to those routes, some sort of aisle system, because we did not want this to feel like a labyrinth that you would get lost in. So that was sort of the de-escalation of talking about this room, of laying out these beds, you know, making sure, being really mindful about no dead ends, very circuitous, a clear wayfinding. But yeah, that's talking about
With a
de-escalation.
very strict square footage limit by our design build partner.
Every single one of these iterations had a bed per square foot association. So.
Yeah.
So now this is a rendering on the right. We're looking in that congregate sleeping room, so you can see a little of what that looks like on the inside. And then left is an image of one of the interiors of the pods. Each of them are about 7 by 10, so about 70 square feet. And I wanted to talk about these dual sleeping facilities when I talked about empowerment, which is our next trauma-informed design principle. So empowerment is pretty self-explanatory. It's giving an individual to make a choice. They have the choice, they have personal space. There's a lot of times they can be in situations where a lot of choices are being taken away from them, whether it's for their safety, for group safety, healing, well-being, you know, yeah, sort of individuality can be stripped away a little bit. So we absolutely want to find moments where we can give it back through empowering them by customization, by defining personal space, by giving them choices on ways to go. So looking at the congregate sleeping room here, we had a big goal, no bunk beds. We wanted each person to have their own alcove, to feel that this was their space. Every bed has their own curtain. They can close it off. That is their personal space. We did the added feature of putting a groove in the concrete and doing a concrete stain. So even when their curtain is open, they have a threshold that shows that this is their boundary, this is their personal space, and they're empowered to be in their space comfortably and confidently. And then looking at the sleeping pod, so the individuals here, they have a different level of independence, obviously. So they have a room to themselves, and then here kind of levels of empowerment. The kind of the next step up we went with was having loose furniture so they can move their space around how they want. They have their own AC unit, they have their own operable windows, they have their door with a lock, and they have just like this independent feeling of living outside in this community. The pods, they have access to all the amenities they need without having to go inside of the congregate building if they don't want to have that experience of being inside the shelter. They can access hygiene rooms from the exterior. They can access the outdoor dining area. And then there's a serving window from the kitchen to the outdoor dining area. So they're able to feel that empowerment of not living in a shelter, but living on their own in this community of apartments. And they're in the sleeping pods. Okay, next slide. Comforts. So this is our last of our 6 trauma-informed design principles. Comfort, I feel like, is really intuitive to talk about when it comes to light, materiality, you know, seating types and things like that. But for the shelter, I wanted to talk about how comfort shaped the space of our buildings, the shape of our buildings. So at the top, this is a section cut that goes through our dining room with our outdoor dining or interior dining. And then also on the lower ceiling part, we have a multi-purpose room and then also kind of like an open lobby lounge space that was a lower ceiling. And for what this is doing, it's comfort again is about options. Some people, when they're in this large gathering space, are they going to be most comfortable with this vaulted ceiling where they feel they have big room and space to spread out? Are they going to feel most comfortable outside? So they can still be part of this main hub of the building, but they have that peripheral area where they're feeling more comfortable by sitting at the exterior dining and seeing through the windows. Or else you want to stay inside and you still want that, you still want to be part of the large hub of space. And we want to add the range of comfort to this large hub of space by providing, you know, a small low ceiling multi-purpose room or a small lounge area. The rendering on the left shows that view of you're sitting in this lounge area that has the couch and it's connected to the large dining room. So again, you can still be a part of the large dining room, but you're finding where you're comfortable. You have options outside the large space or kind of like the low ceiling area. You're finding comfort. So that's how we're applying comfort to the section of the building. And then we also are applying comfort to the hygiene area. So that bottom rendering and section is a cut going through a hygiene area. This is probably the least comfortable, like traditionally would be considered the least comfortable part of a project. It's where you're most vulnerable. It's where you're taking a shower with a bunch of strangers in a room. So we really kind of focus on how can we make people feel safe and comfortable and well when they're in such a vulnerable state. So first it was very much so all of our shower and toilet rooms are individual rooms with doors and latches. Some rooms have sinks within it as well. And then we also have sinks within the large common area that connects all the spaces. And then also we have a skylight in the hygiene area. I think we would like to have skylights everywhere. I think we tried to put skylights in a lot more places, but budget and reality. And so we kind of really had to focus on where would these skylights be the most impactful. And that's where we narrowed it down. And so we have our skylights in our bathroom. And that turned that space from kind of what you would think is like, you know, high school locker room nightmare to like a super nice and pleasant space to be. So it changes the comfort of that whole space and makes it really nice by just kind of doing that move of cutting the skylight through the ceiling. Which is really easy, you know, just fell right there to do. But yeah, so I think no matter of like how much tile and materials we went to that space, it's really the skylight is what really made that room comfortable. And then I think there's one more slide I'm going to talk about, Dave. So we went through the Hillsboro shelter through the lens of looking at the 6 trauma-informed design principles. So I just kind of want to wrap up my talk about the shelter by showing a couple images. On the left, you can see the outdoor dining area and how people can sit outside and still have that connection to the indoor space, see what's going on, go in if they want to. On the upper image on the right, this is our main dining area. We do have that hearth. It's a large casework. We see this as we're aiming for this to be a living room feeling. We don't want this to be a clinical, institutional gathering space, right? We're going for soft acoustic material on the ceiling. We have our wooden TV casework. We have not shown in this rendering is that we added in some built-in benches to this space, loose furniture that people can move around as they want. So really this is the living room of the project for people to feel comfortable in. And then the bottom two images, the bottom two renderings here, one is down the corridor in the main building and the other is down that exterior corridor looking down the pods. And this is speaking to the coherency of the project, the visibility and the safety of having these long sight lines, this long ease of understanding where you are in the project, things like that. And then Dave's gonna wrap up the presentation with some site photos and talking about next steps.
Yeah, so like we mentioned earlier, the project is nearing completion. I think we're going to be wrapping up. When are we wrapping up, Jesse? Sometime in
November.
October, November, in
Mhm,
time for Thanksgiving, I think was the goal.
mhm.
And so that's less than 2 years from like the beginning of programming to the end of construction. So for anybody that does these types of projects, you know that that's pretty quick. And we're currently ahead of schedule and below budget. So that's a testament to the power of the design build partnership. I think I'm seeing some of the questions in the chat. There are so many lessons learned from this project, and I think that you know, in nobody's perfect world is this the kind of project that we should strive to do for people. That's kind of a controversial thing to say. We don't live in a perfect world, and we are trying to solve a homelessness crisis that has so many different variables to it that just make it so uh, difficult to manage. And so what this project really speaks to is I think the highest and best use of resources to serve the most people in the most compassionate way we can with the money that we have. Um, and I think that hopefully we can do more of this and we can continue to up the ante of what sorts of services are available to folks that are experiencing homelessness, that are experiencing trauma. Um, but uh, but yeah, it's this has been a whirlwind of a project. It's been a whole bunch of different jurisdictions coming together to work to try and solve this problem on the west side of the hills. And I actually think that the east side of the hills, the city of Portland, could learn a thing or two about how to get something done in less than 2 years to serve this many folks. So it's been really educational for Holst. We've enjoyed being a part of it and happy to answer any questions y'all have.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jesse. That's an awesome overview. Really appreciate all the graphics and kind of talking through your design process as well. That's really helpful. Let's see. I'm gonna start with, I think David had a good question to kind of kick us off. It's just kind of that big picture context, citing, I think like while the location was kind of pre-selected before you all came into the picture. If you could just maybe from your broader experience talk about context and the pros and cons of that urban versus kind of rural suburban fringe,
Yeah,
from your perspective, and that may relate to community engagement, other services, and
yeah.
other services available, etc.
Well, and I don't want these types of projects can get political very quickly, and I don't want to get too political, but I think that it's pretty evident that there's a reason why this site was chosen. It is on the edge. It is not a site that you're going to get a lot of people showing up to community engagement meetings with pitchforks and torches, like we're seeing right now in the Pearl District, about shelter for folks. So, I think there was some strategy to the site location. And so I think our challenge as designers was You know, what is this site? Is this, like I said earlier, is this an agrarian site? Is this a suburban site? Is this a gateway site? And then how do you do something that's both contributing to the public realm, even if you're just driving by, but that provides a positive reinforcement to the entrance to Hillsboro, but also provides a very cloistered and secured sense of privacy for the folks that are living here, and that they're not put on display, that they don't feel like they're being ostracized. And so I think that's a huge design challenge. And so how we decided to site the buildings, create this, I think, very delicate circulation of the pods, and create these small little pockets of moments. These are all like us doing the best we can with a very difficult problem. And so, I think that uh, shelters in general are one of the hardest project types to design, because you're going to, to be frank, you're going to piss somebody off no matter what you do. You're either you're either giving something too nice to what some people think people don't deserve. You're either not giving something nice enough to what you think is like a part of a human right, or a sense of dignity that someone needs. And so how do we take every dollar that's being spent and create the on balance the best possible solution for folks?
Awesome. Yeah, I think you've done a great job. I feel like this is a great precedent, kind of treating the emergency like an emergency and balancing cost, time, quality, and trying to strike the balance of all of those things. Again, as you mentioned, in an imperfect world. Let's see. Peter had a question I think is mostly addressed, but I just thought it might be worth kind of hovering on this for a moment. It's just trying to think about, like, I think shelter and hygiene, sleeping and hygiene are kind of like the two most sensitive moments of somebody's day. And I think with the pods, you showed kind of doors that close. You mentioned a lock. How do you kind of create that equivalent, particularly in sleeping in the dormitory?
Yeah.
I think you had
And
kind of a curtain that closes. Like, what was kind of the decision making behind elements and choices like that? Again,
right.
factoring in cost and
And
whatnot.
and
But
it's also acuity. So there's a spectrum of acuity of folks that are experiencing homelessness, everywhere from folks that are, just temporarily homeless because of a loss of job, and they just need, one aspect taken care of, and then get back on their feet and get back into normalcy. Then there's folks that, struggle long term with chronic homelessness, with mental health issues, with addiction issues, where being cloistered and on their own isn't necessarily the best thing for them, and they need to have some folks that are there that can easily help them. And so it was both a balance of cost. We don't have enough money to do all pods, but also a service model where the folks that need the most help are easily accessible by staff. And so, but the number one thing that we pushed for from the very get-go, and I think, we've pretty much held to that, is no bunk beds. When I first started doing shelters, 15, 18 years ago, bunk beds were the standard. Like, it was just assumed. We're just going to cram in as many bunks as we can get in here, and house as many folks as we can, which, back to that emergency piece, makes some sense. If you're in an emergency, house as many people as you can. But in this project, what we really tried to do was make each of those alcoves a person's home, and do everything we can to make it feel like a home. Give a threshold, give a privacy, give, individuality through different color, through places where they can put their own belongings. Earlier shelters I've worked on, there's no storage at the bed, and the storage is down the hall and in a locker. And it's treated much more like, almost like military barracks. And so, I think that this is taking this idea of congregate sleeping to a much more humane level, even though to some of us it feels like it's still inhumane.
great. I'm gonna throw a pop survey in. I'm just curious. So Dave gave this presentation of not the same one, but a similar one last year at the Housing Oregon conference. And my perception from sitting in the audience was that there just wasn't a huge amount of experience personally in the design community in actually using design build contracts. And so I think I'm going to keep peppering you with questions, Dave and Jesse, but I'd be curious if folks could just like do a little thumbs up or hand raise if you personally have worked on a design build contract. And I think kind of related to that, there's a lot of questions about cost, cost efficiency. Dave's got a question particularly about site built versus design build. I think last year you mentioned that you guys had done a bunch of research into, what products are already available on the market, and doing a stick built structure for the pods was way more cost effective. Could you maybe just talk a little bit
Yeah, for
about
sure.
that, and then
Yeah,
just
I
kind
mean,
of big
I've
picture cost divided by kind of
and I think
beds?
you
And
talked about prefab last month. I missed that
we
UDP,
did.
but
We had
you
a
had
modular
Stuart and
housing.
um
Roger Krulak
oh,
from
Roger, right.
Full Stack
Modular
Modular.
Um
full stack.
so yeah, we came into this project assuming we were going to prefabricate the pods. That was the original assumption with the previous design that we inherited. That's how a lot of these villages are put together, is they're built off site or even purchased products. But as we were dialing in the site plan, both from a placemaking perspective and also a cost perspective, trying to limit how much of the land we used, like that was our big key to like driving costs down, was not developing the whole site. And trying to create these pockets and this intentional layout that provides these areas for folks. Modular was a huge constraint because we had to work within certain parameters. We didn't have complete design flexibility. Um, Products didn't exist for what we were looking for, so we were inventing something, which meant we had to find someone to invent with that was going to build what we wanted. And then the other piece was just navigating. Even it's a pretty flat site, but it's not flat. So even just navigating some grade with prefabricated structures becomes really problematic really quickly, especially when you're trying to provide universal accessibility, provide as much of a level access for people that often have a lot of mobility challenges. And so we found that the least expensive way to go about it and to get the most custom layout was to do stick built. I still think prefab has its place, and there are, it certainly has a reason to do it at the right time. I've done a prefab project out in North Portland. But in this case, stick built was the fastest, the cheapest, and the best for the design.
Great. Let's see. Chris has a question, just even kind of being in your local context for this site. Did you face any pushback from neighboring agencies, community residents? Looks like I'm just looking at the Google area. Looks like there's a big post office out there. As you mentioned, the Winco, a DMV, a lot of kind of publicly owned land, a disc
Yeah.
golf course. What was your experience doing?
Um,
Did you guys do engagement?
I think all the negative engagement happened with the team previous to us. I think that was like getting it past the hurdle of, and which to their credit, they're great designers. I think that they had to bear the burden of that engagement that can often go negative with shelters. When we got on board, it was kind of a foregone conclusion that this was going to happen. So we had the parameters set, and there was buy-in from everybody. That being said, kudos to the jurisdiction. The City of Hillsboro voluntarily went through a public design review process. They could have followed the governor's mandates that shelters can skip land use processes. City of Hillsboro did not do that. We went through a full design review process. We didn't experience much pushback. So I do think that we benefited from the previous team's probably arrows.
Ooh, and Roseanne has a really great question, kind of related to this. Just other projects and on here, do you typically ever do post-occupancy evaluations, actually doing engagement with the users just to collect feedback to really keep informing?
What a great
The
question.
Yes.
Yeah, so Holst is doing a lot of post-occupancy evaluation right now. We had a strategic meeting with the firm a couple of years ago, and that was like the number one thing that came out of everybody's mind was like, we don't know if the designs we're coming up with work.
Mm-hmm.
We do the 12-month walks. We go back to projects from time to time. We do lessons learned, but we didn't have a very scientific way of measuring the success of our projects. So we've undertaken a much more rigorous approach to post-occupancy evaluation. Right now, we're actually doing a deep dive on that prefab project I talked about in North Portland called Argyle Gardens, which has a lot of lessons learned. And we're going to be publishing our report later this fall or winter about how that's gone. The first project we did before that was 72 Foster out in Southeast Portland. And we did a full-blown report on that as well. So we're going to be doing at least one project a year, and usually trying to pick the projects that we think we can learn the most lessons from, that may have been the most atypical, that may have been the most kind of like boundary pushing, to see if pushing those boundaries helped or hurt. Sometimes it's been both. But yeah, I think the shelter would be an excellent candidate for our POE for 2026.
Awesome. And maybe kind of just more broadly too, Jesse, I'd be curious to know, the six kind of pillars or principles of trauma-informed design. I mean, as an industry, is that something that the AIA kind of helps inform design community on? Like how would one learn more about trauma-informed design if they were interested? How did you all kind of, aside from kind of project-based knowledge, get that understanding?
I feel there might be a lot more documentation out almost on inclusive design right now. I feel like if you're looking for material to read about, I feel that inclusive design and trauma-informed design go pretty well hand in hand. And a lot of the principles between there can cross over to each other, because inherently to be trauma-informed is to be inclusive. So I say if you're looking for trauma-informed decisions or designs and you're not kind of finding it, you can also broaden that search out to inclusive, really focusing on IDD aspects, intellectual developmental disability, kind of that avenue of inclusive design really overlaps quite a bit with trauma-informed decision making. I think that's
We're
yeah,
seeing
that's sort of,
and we're seeing it more and more. I think
yeah.
it's becoming more commonplace. When I first was introduced to trauma-informed design, it really came out of trauma-informed treatment principles that you see a lot in mental health and addiction kind of environments. And I think that softer side of healthcare, kind of clinical healthcare, treatment healthcare, they've embraced trauma-informed principles quite a bit. And so it's good to see that moving into the built environment as well. And in some ways, it's also a continuation of what we saw with biophilic design when that became quite popular 15, 20 years ago. So I think in some ways, having done this for a while, I kind of feel like, well, it's just good design. Like isn't
Mm.
connection to light and air and nature and natural materials and coherency, and like that's what we strive to do as architects. But I think it's also very valuable to see it through the lens of folks that see the world a bit differently, and may have had tougher times than you. So I certainly think it's a worthwhile perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
and
give,
and I'm just gonna chime in quickly, Fiona, and say that the AIA does a good job of facilitating, to Dave's point, of facilitating presentations as they evolve and as they come out, just like this project where they've done a great job and can really have further and further insight into trauma-informed design as a thing that's really always learning and growing and really context relevant. We're running out of time, and I am too. There is a question about cost per bed, Dave, Jesse. I don't know if you have something like that in hand.
All right,
Do
let me
your
get
quick
out my
math.
calculator. Let me get out my
You know the
calculator here. How
numbers.
many beds did we end up, Jesse? 75? Okay, hold on a second. I have to add zeros here,
And
unfortunately.
it's an interesting, I think while you're doing the math, I would just point out, I feel like this is an interesting scale. I feel like you see a lot of like really, really, really small
Little ones
infill
are
kind of
big.
pods. And then like just enormous, overwhelming, kind of like oversaturated, only place that it works in the city. And
Yeah.
I just wonder if you have any commentary on like 75 beds feels like a humane, reasonable,
Yeah.
operable,
Yeah.
facility.
The word humane, it feels so loaded in this scenario because it's like, personally, I feel like we should be spending a lot more money on these sorts of services. And so,
Mhm.
but like I said, we're doing the best with what we have. But then again, we're also spending, to people that worry about this sort of thing, we're spending $187,000 per bed for shelter, and that's just to build it. And I think one thing that a lot of people don't understand about shelter is that building them is the cheapest part of it by far.
Mhm.
Operating a shelter is extremely expensive. So when you hear
Right.
about people saying, "Oh, affordable housing so expensive," the cost per unit, this and that, I guarantee you, it costs society way more to build shelters and to provide people shelter beds than it does to provide people apartments. I also
Mhm.
guarantee you it costs way more to build a jail cell or a hospital room than it does to build an apartment.
Right. That's a
So
fantastic,
Really
anyway,
Dave, that's a
good thought.
fantastic summary.
that's
I
my
like that a lot.
soapbox.
Yeah.
That's good, but it's good perspective. It's fantastic perspective. I have an insider game on this one because I was reviewing this design, this site proposal, and this design through the several iterations. The things you've landed on here have been so insightful. I was just so much in support of the design that you brought to the table. And I think what folks don't see here on the drawing is that to the west, which is the top of the page, basically it's a significant natural resources streamway with a topo drop off. I've had many people come to this site trying to develop it, and in reality, that preserves the view that you've basically created that context of green on the people side, on the population that lives and uses
Mhm.
this shelter. So I think it's great. We do have to cut off here because everyone's going to disappear. We see people saying thank you and
Dave,
interesting,
yep,
rewarding project, and really do appreciate uh, taking the time to show us your good work. And I say that with my Hillsboro hat on as much as I say just for the urban design panel. Um, if there's anything you'd like to wrap up with, please do it now, and then we'll call it a day.
No, just good to see everybody, and glad to see the urban design panel thriving. And thank you for all you're doing, championing the built environment, the public realm. Keep it up.
It's
ditto.
appreciated.
Thank you for the
Um,
wonderful presentation.
Thanks,
yeah,
everyone.
All right.
great. See you all next
See you all
month.
next month.
Don't forget to sign up for your continuing education credits in
Yeah.
the chat.
Now I have to give them a second.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yep. See you later.